Good day, everybody. Morsels of a Thought number 1850. What a nice round number, and it's pretty high up there, too. Yes, I'm a rules girl. Yes, I do talk about other things. Yes, I do read many books. And today we're on Larry J. Namer. Off script. Can you see it right here? Off script, and it's recipes for success. Never follow the crowd. This way, this way. And we are hoping to get wisdom from people who know the right things to do so that we can learn the right things to do, because wisdom is knowing the right things to do and virtue is the doing of it. So I'm reading these things to you. The OJ stories. This is page 57. I am hoping that we learn what to do and learn also the pitfalls of what other people found were not the right things to do. Okay, chapter 10, the OJ stories. This is Larry J. Namer. Yes, he is part of E Entertainment. He is a co founder. Yes, he says. You probably recognize some of the names of the athletes who we partnered with when we were working on FX TV. There was Kareem, Bruce Jenner, and I think it's safe to say that just about everybody has heard of O.J. Simpson. Well, here's the story about how we met and any take on one of the biggest questions of the 90s. Did O.J. get away with murder? Hollywood is all about image and lifestyle, and while I lived and worked there, I was married and had two young kids and was more middle of the road, preferring a quieter, out of the public eye lifestyle. Alan, on the other hand, was much more Hollywood, quote unquote, than I was. And why not? He was a single guy living the life, going out on the town and frequenting all the local hotspots. At the time, he lived in LA in a great house in Coldwater Canyon and enjoyed dating young starlets, models, and penthouse pets, capital P, capital P. Well, Alan called me one evening, and I could tell he was a bit frantic as he told me that he had to move out of his house, check into a hotel, and hire security. Apparently, he had made a very big guy very angry by going out with the big guy's girlfriend. Oh, God, I hate that. For that, there would be a price to pay. From what I could quickly gather and later got all the details, Alan went out with a very hot young actress named Connie Kitane, Kitane, who rose to fame as the female lead in the movie Bachelor Party and later married rock star David Coverdale. Unknown to Alan at the time, Tawny was dating football legend O.J. Simpson, who had a history of being pretty volatile. Well, when the date was over, Alan was dropping Tawny off at her place. But when they were in front of her house, a car suddenly pulled up behind them. Seeing the car, Tawny knew who it was and told Alan not to stop his car and to drive around the block instead. As Alan drove around the block, they noticed that the car followed them. Once again, they didn't stop and went around the block one more time. The car stayed on their tail. Finally, Tawny said, "Stop the car. I'll get out and stand in front of his car. He won't run me over. You just drive away." That's exactly what Alan did, but it didn't stop there. OJ had a score to settle, and it didn't have anything to do with football. A very angry OJ went to all the hot spots around town and let it be known that when he got his hands on Andrew Marufka, Mruvka, he was going to inflict pain and lots of it. Not one to let bygones be bygones, OJ wasn't going to give Alan an easy out. After several threatening phone exchanges, we thought of a way to hopefully calm him down and spare Alan's life, or at least keep him from beating him to a pulp. It seems Alan had a childhood friend named Blake Olson, whose father was Frank Olson, the chairman of Hertz. Frank was the brainchild behind casting OJ in Hertz commercials, and in OJ's post NFL days, his role as the Hertz spokesperson was very important to the running back. Along with his role as an NFL commentator, not only was it his most lucrative source of income, but the famous commercials featuring him running through airports were also what kept him in the center of the public eye. Alan either had to show his power or he was a dead man. So he let OJ know that if he didn't back off, all he had to do was call Blake and fill him in on what was going on, and he was certain that Blake would tell his dad. Because Frank Olson was a deeply religious man, everyone knew that he wouldn't take too kindly to learning that his brand ambassador was going to beat up one of his son's friends, especially since OJ was married to Nicole Brown and cheating on her with Tawny, the woman OJ was willing to fight over. When Frank Olson's name came into the picture, OJ quickly changed his tune and suggested that we all meet to clear this little matter up. After all, he said there was no reason to let a gal cause any hard feelings or animosity between us. Understandably, Alan didn't want to go to this meeting alone, and he asked me to go with him to have lunch with OJ at La Scala restaurant in Beverly Hills. La Scala is also somewhere else. Yeah. We had a very nice, cordial lunch and, ironically, began a friendship and eventually a partnership in our potential network, FX TV. Oh, I remember it well. I had the La Scala salad with salami. Our friend, oh, by the way, the reason I haven't shown you one of his recipes this morning, which I was going to do, is that I have a little technical difficulty and can't print out the picture of it yet. Our friendship, I have a subscription to an ink provider, and they don't let me have an extra cartridge lying around. So when I run out of ink, I actually have to wait 3 or 4 days or 5 to get ink. It's awful. Anyway, yeah, it's brother. Our friendship and partnership with OJ continued, and we got to know him well. We are reading from Larry J. Namer's Off Script, Never Follow the Crowd, Recipes for Success. And he really does have recipes in this book, which we will go into when I can print out a copy of the picture of it. Anyway, our friendship with and our friendship and partnership with OJ continued, and we got to know him well. OJ and Nicole would eventually divorce, and I also divorced my wife, the mother of my 2 children. A few days before Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman were murdered, I was with my then girlfriend, Natalie Sherbakova, Nataly, capital Sherbakova, Sherbakova, at the Foundation Room of House of Blues. This was the private VIP room where all the Hollywood celebs hung out. By this time, I was a bit more, quote, Hollywood, end quote, always loaded with young wannabe actresses and true to form. OJ was always working the room, but not on that night. Something was off, very off. When I saw OJ, he was standing off to the side with his arms folded across his chest. He looked disturbed, almost ominous. Suffice it to say that there was no doubt that OJ was not happy. Concerned, I walked over to him and asked him if something was wrong. He clearly did not want to talk and shot back with, "Nothing, man," before returning to whatever it was that had disturbed him and was consuming his mind. Realizing that he was in no state of mind to make small talk, I left him alone for the rest of the night. Even so, his mood stuck with me. It bothered me so much that I contacted Alan the next day for the sole purpose of seeing if he knew what was up. "Hey, what's wrong with OJ?" I asked. He was acting really weird last night. Ellen replied that he wasn't aware of anything, and we left it at that. A few days later, I was in Moscow in my hotel room when a friend from LA called. Larry, do you get CNN? He asked. You need to turn it on. Turning on the TV, I sat and watched the infamous Bronco chase from my hotel room in Russia. I remember watching the same chase from Redwood City, California, and it didn't make him look good, but I was still confused. It all came back to me, the way OJ had acted just a few nights before, the times Chris Jenner would ask me and Alan how we could possibly be friends with a guy who beats his wife. She even predicted it, saying that one day he could kill her. We dismissed her intuition, thinking she was an alarmist who was overprotective of Nicole, who was one of her very good friends. That was the beginning of the downfall of O.J. Simpson, as the murders took center stage over O.J.'s football career and accomplishments. Naturally, it was also the end of any potential partnership between me, Alan, and O.J. And we all know how the saga ends as the life of one of football's greatest players took a downward spiral. But for a while, we got to know and work with the Juice, capital T, capital J, O.J. Simpson, and actually became friends with the guy who threatened to tear Ellen from limb to limb. Ironically, Frank Olson and O.J. Simpson both died on the very same day. And to answer the question, yes, I believe OJ did it. In fact, I believe I interrupted him as he was creating his dark and sinister plan to do so when I asked if something was wrong. While I knew that something wasn't right, little did I know that something was indeed wrong that night. Something was very, very wrong. So there's that. In other words, you can't know when somebody else is going to commit a crime. You can see the signs and you can probably speak up, but I don't see how Larry J. Namer could have spoken up to Nicole Brown to warn her of anything. I don't see anything except maybe he could have, you know, but he couldn't have because nobody, there's there was just no way to prevent it from Nicole's perspective, I guess. It was really hard to say. Anyway, yes, I do believe he did it too. I will be brave enough to say that now that I read it out of the book that he says this. Me, a coward, kind of talking about, wow, my opinions. Um, Wednesday, I will talk about my leanings politically. Chapter 11, The Women in My Life. As I mentioned in the previous chapter, says Larry J. Namer, at the time I met OJ, I was in a relationship with Natalie, Nataly, but she was not the first serious relationship in my life. It would be impossible for me to write about the events and people in my life without introducing the women who were part of it. And it all started with Nancy. Nancy was my high school sweetheart, and we literally were married right out of college. We were living in Brooklyn, and then together we moved to Manhattan. Our marriage unraveled about 3 years in, and the divorce was less than friendly. It's safe to say that it was bitter, and I admit that I was largely at fault. Time and hindsight have given me a new perspective, and I can see that I wasn't the best husband. Actually, I was an idiot. Nancy was very hurt, and she became quite vindictive, and the divorce encompassed about 4 years in hearings and legal proceedings. At the time of our divorce, I lived in California while Nancy was in New York, and in my opinion, her lawyer was better than mine. Every time there was an issue, I'd have to go back to New York for a deposition. As you can imagine, after multiple depositions, flights, and time away from work, the fight wasn't worth the trouble and inconvenience. Finally, I just said, you know what? We're fighting over money. You keep it all. I'm done. Now, Nancy and I split before I came out to California, and I started seeing a woman who had worked at Manhattan Cable. Our relationship started right before I moved to California, and Carolyn joined me after I started working for Valley. Carolyn and I had two children, Nicole and Jonathan. And when that relationship ended, I met Natalie, who was the niece of the former Russian ruler Leonid Brezhnev. At the time, Natalie was living here, but she grew up in Russia and was kind of like a little princess. After all, she had a powerful uncle, oh niece, the kind of uncle who could send people to Siberia never to be seen again. Natalie is the mother of my youngest son, Alexander. As most people know, the entertainment industry isn't always conducive to lasting relationships. And I can partly contribute the demise of these relationships to the environment. But I do not regret those relationships. They were important parts of my life, and I've learned a great deal from them. Even more, though, through these relationships, I became a father, and I love and am proud of all my children and the grandchild they have given me, who has enriched my life and brought me joy. Off script, Larry J. Namer. And his book is titled Recipes for Success. Never follow the crowd. There are real recipes in the back of this book. I shall continue reading those later when my printer can show you some pictures of the food. Most of all, my relationships taught me that the most important thing in life is to be happy. I'm not quite sure where I got that insight, but I used to argue it with my mom. She would say, "Are Nicole and her boyfriend serious and planning to get married?" My response was always the same: "I don't care if she gets married, just that she is happy." The object is not to be married, but to be happy. And if marriage helps you reach that state, so be it. And that is what makes you happy. Be content with being single. To Russia with Love, Chapter 12. While E was a challenge to fund and launch capital E exclamation point. While E was a challenge to fund and launch, it became a huge success and was the birthplace for some long-time shows like Talk Soup, Howard Stern, E Hollywood True Stories, Wild on E, and Fashion Police with Joan Rivers. Ooh. People loved having a window into the world of the stars, and our platform gave them access to their idols and allowed them to see the lives of celebrities from the outside in. We enjoyed our success, which sparked interested buyers. Eventually, Alan and I sold our stake in E, though I remained on the board of directors. I was contemplating my next move when a lawyer friend called and said he had some clients involved in merchant banking. It seemed that he had a connection in the Soviet Union who proposed an entertainment deal to them. He asked if I would go to Russia with them and see if this deal had any validity. Totally intrigued with the thought of going to the Soviet Union, I quickly agreed. Now, at the time, I didn't know a lot about Russia, but I remember back in public school PS 188 in Brooklyn that we frequently had air raid drills and had to get under our desks in the event that the Soviets bombed us. It started with Khrushchev pounding his shoe in the podium on the podium of the UN, and then was taken on by his successor, Leonid Brezhnev. I went to Moscow and then on to St. Petersburg with them, where I met a Russian general who was seeing the future and had dreams of starting a film company. He and Tom Wheelock, Wheelock, one of the merchant banking folks, met in the Sinai Desert when Russia and the US both supplied UN peacekeeping forces. As I remember their stories, they patrolled the borders during the day and drank vodka at night. I went with them, and the idea they were presented with was not very good. It was about creating a company that would build living room facilities around the country that people could rent to show VHS movies on a big screen via a projector. We passed on that deal, but I met Anatoly Sobchak, the mayor of St. Petersburg, who convinced me that the move to rid the country of communists was inevitable and Russia would join the world as a democracy. I have to say that the whole thing was surreal, much like I was living within a piece of history. It was exciting to meet the folks we had considered our enemy for so many decades, only to find out that we had so much in common. We all had dreams for our lives, for our children, and our freedom. As a matter of fact, there is one saying that I heard over and over that stuck with me. Quote, America is what we would have been if it wasn't for the fucking communists. He didn't write it that way. End quote. F apostrophe N, communists. Now, when I went to Russia, it was still the Soviet Union, and oh God, he heard it over and over. America is what we could have been if it wasn't for the effing communists. I should have said it that way. Now, when I went to Russia, it was still the Soviet Union, and the state-run machines were in full force, although you could sense that their time was soon to expire. The people were wonderful, and even with food shortages and other hardships, they would invite people into their home and make them tea. If they had to, they would empty the refrigerator in order to be a good host. I did that. I ultimately decided to partner with the merchant bankers, and we started a new company called Comspan Communications, capital C, whose sole mission was to build business in Russia. Tom and his partner, Lou, mainly handled the merchant banking stuff, while I handled my areas of expertise, media, and entertainment. After Lou left the company, Tom and I shared all the responsibilities along with David Lafaille, Lafaille, the lawyer who approached me about going there, who came in as counsel to the new company. We worked very closely with a St. Petersburg company called Russian Video, capital V, which was uh, which was headed by a very philosophical Russian named Dmitry Rozhdev Rozdeshevsky, Rozhdeshevsky, Rozdeshevsky, who was a wonderful, brilliant guy, but a dreamer on steroids. On top of that, he talked in long metaphors. Saying hello to him often turned into an hour-long conversation. He was full of grandiose ideas on building a media empire, but sometimes he forgot this was still the Soviet Union, and the chances of all of that happening were slim, very slim. But I have to admit that it was fun to dream with him, and we did some very fun stuff together, like making a movie called Russian Holiday, which was essentially for the classic Roman holiday, but set in St. Petersburg. Actually, it was a terrible movie, but we managed to sell it to CBS at a profit. For me, that was a humbling lesson, one where I learned that what one where I learned what I'm not good at. It turns out that I am not good at making movies. Next week we will read the best thing to come out of the Russian video experience. Let's see later on. Okay, old Kinderhook.